Jesus points out that we are focusing on others' specks, relatively minor problems, rather than our own large log, that we are ignoring our own log by presuming that we should direct and control others when we haven't even bothered to explore our own humanness and shortcomings. In that sense, we are truly blinded by the gratifying feeling of power over others that enables us to forget how flawed, how messed up we ourselves are. Careful self-examination and a sincere willingness to seek ways of improving ourselves provide the foundation for effective leadership. When we don't engage in this honest self-evaluation and corrective process, we set ourselves up for doing more harm than good. All this does not mean that it is never appropriate to try to influence, to lead others. On the contrary, providing constructive, effective, ethical leadership is one of the greatest acts of service we can perform. More on leadership as service later. But leadership of others needs to come from an honest appreciation of our own humanness, from a sound, caring base of humility and a practical understanding of the unique human struggle that each of us faces as we try to be right with our life and the world. Jesus points to a kind of leadership that recognizes the value of each person and is exercised out of a sense of caring and commitment to the well-being of those being led. It also recognizes that each of us is ultimately our own leader when leadership is performed on a higher spiritual plane. I have found this personal struggle to direct and motivate ourselves constructively to be at the heart of the search for a full and satisfactory life. In my own consulting and executive development work, it has been humbling to realize that often things go much better the less I try to direct and lead. Frequently, my best work has resulted from simply listening sincerely and helping my clients figure out what is best for themselves. That is, helping and allowing them to solve their own problems. When I try to be wise and expert and force all my concepts, ideas, and knowledge into my service, I interfere with my clients' self-discovery. Worse, at times I completely miss the boat and get bogged down with my own opinions and view of the world. I have learned that the best consultants are the ones who recognize how limited their knowledge really is, who continually learn and improve themselves, and most of all, who recognize that the real experts are usually the clients who have to live with their problems every day. The trick is for the consultant to remove or neutralize as much as possible their own blinders, logs, and help clients sort through the often tiny specks that are blocking their own barely hidden solutions. I believe that the same principle applies to almost anyone leading or helping someone else. Be humble and assume that most people know a heck of a lot more about their problem than you do. By becoming more effective in our own self-leadership, not only do we gain greater insight and empathy for others who also struggle to make good choices and improve themselves, but we also serve as a model, which is central to leadership. Being a model in this sense does not mean that we want others to imitate and be exactly like us. Rather, we can serve as an example of someone who has sincerely struggled with being personally effective and has found his or her own way. As a result, we are in a better position to help others find their own way as well. On occasion, when I finish a training program or a consulting project, the client says to me something like, "You really practice what you preach. You got us to solve our own problem." For me, that is the greatest compliment I can receive as a consultant. The powerful leadership lesson that Jesus teaches us is that if we don't take the important step of looking in the mirror and examining and leading ourselves first, we can be blinded by this shortcoming. It is as though we have a big wood sliver, indeed a log, in our eyes so that we cannot see others clearly. First remove the log and get right with yourself. Then serve as an example and source of help, leadership, for others. The primary prerequisites for leadership and for administering cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, contain some insightful similarities. Obviously, we need to be alive, conscious, and breathing before we start trying to revive others through CPR. Similarly, Living and leading ourselves properly is like the breath that sustains our ability to lead others and to guide them on how to work and live. Many people believe that leadership is restricted to an outward influence process that requires leaders to lead and followers to follow, and that leadership is not something we can do for ourselves. On the contrary, leaders and followers form an organic whole that is required for leadership to unfold, and at the very core of the leadership process, leaders and followers are one and the same. We can and do lead ourselves. Self-leadership is the breath, and without it, the leader is in need of some serious leadership CPR. That brings us back to Jesus' lesson of logs before specks. How can people expect to lead others effectively if they won't take the time, in fact, if they refuse to make an effort to live their own lives, to lead themselves, positively and constructively first? According to Jesus, they cannot. To do so is like trying to carry on without taking the time to breathe. To become an effective leader for others, first learn to lead yourself. The last shall be first. He asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whosoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Mark 9, verses 33 to 35. Jesus took a surprising and fascinating approach to the topic of achieving fame and glory. In fact, he suggested that the only sure way to become great is to seek just the opposite. He taught that if you want to come in first, then purposely put yourself last. He directed that we should become last of all and the servant of all. That is an awfully hard pill for most of us to swallow. Much that we have learned about human nature suggests how important it is to build up our self-esteem and our belief in ourselves. In this spirit, the virtues of accomplishment in athletics, academics, work, and so forth have been prescribed as healthy medicine for our psyche. The right to say, "I'm number one," has become a compulsive quest for millions around the world. Yet Jesus says, don't aim to be first, be last. What gives? I don't think Jesus is recommending that we should strive for mediocrity or that we should waste rather than develop and apply our talents. Indeed, fruitfully using our gifts in constructive ways is a common theme throughout the Bible. But Jesus sends a clear message that we should not exaggerate our sense of superiority, that we should not become too caught up in our own importance. Most of all, he seems to be saying that those who are directly striving to be great as an end in itself are going at it the wrong way. Be humble, and don't be a conceited self-advocate. Be a servant, and strive to put others first. This is the path to greatness, though often camouflaged and hard to see, that Jesus prescribes. Of course, Jesus was especially concerned with greatness in a spiritual sense, in terms of God's realm, and not so much in a worldly sense. Nevertheless, the philosophy he advocated, humility, service, forgiveness, can lead to the kind of respect and love from others that many view as the real signs of greatness. Jesus went even further in his instructions to the disciples. The disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a child whom he had put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 18, verses 1 through 4. The idea of becoming like a child will likely affect readers in a variety of ways. Certainly the idea of becoming passive and naive will not strike many as particularly constructive. The important lesson that I take from this passage, however, is the idea of becoming humble like this child. Again, this means resisting the temptation to become too full of ourselves, puffed up with an exaggerated sense of self-importance. Of course, a variety of other positive images can be gleaned from mounting research that points to the positive benefits, increased health, creativity, ability to learn, and so on, of regaining some of our ability to be like children, playful, lighthearted, and inquisitive. Jesus' ideas run counter to many hardened adults' natural tendencies to become cynical, closed off, and self-centered in an increasing